Hi everyone, it's Jerome Sewell here from Unique Talent. Welcome again to all of those who watch us and all of those who support our company. Thank you. So today we've got kind of a special intermission. It's a guest speaker series again, actually, with an organization called Off the Record. So Off the Record is a youth counselling service based in Mitcham, and they do counselling services for people in Merton, Croydon and Sutton, those boroughs. So yeah, we look forward to having them on. This is topical. Today's topic will be on something called the freeze, fight and flight response. And that's a very interesting topic actually for those who are involved in kind of work to do with gang crime and youth violence, basically. Because it influences the way, we respond to situations and what we do about them. And I think hopefully you guys will find this very interesting. Thank you for those who have tuned in. Hi, Savannah Marie. Hi, Flourishing Diversity. We'll wait for Off the Record to get involved, and we'll see how this progresses and how this kicks off. And by the way, I think the new lineup that we've had recently has been really good, actually. Michael and Chris and Russell have, been covering key issues, actually. Joint enterprise is a massive issue, and it's something that affects a lot of young people. And, they just don't usually see this, basically, see what goes on here, in terms of the implications that their friends can have of them. But yeah, we look forward to once again hosting someone here who can talk us through kind of fight flight from a psychological angle, actually. And obviously we come from a rehabilitative standpoint. So yeah, I'm sure you all find it very interesting. Hi Shorty Smalls, hello. Hi. So, by the way, the person that will be joining us, his name is Matthew Taylor. And he works for that company, university graduate with a psychology degree, knows what he's talking about, basically. So he'll take us off on this. Hello, Mr. Cool River. Thank you, Flourishing Diversity. Yeah, I think it will be really interesting, actually, what we cover today. It's going to be quite, it's quite unique, actually, to cover this kind of topic. We don't usually do psychological stuff, even though, Russell, he does touch on trauma and those kind of things. Hi, Pulse Academy. Yeah, good to see you. Good to see you guys. Just for those who have joined us, we're doing a guest speaker series again today, with an organization called Off the Record, who are a youth counselling service based in London. Hello, Talk Off the Record. They're coming in soon, so we'll be able to join them soon. Hey. Hey, Daily Blogs. Hello. Hi. So yeah, we'll just wait for Matthew Taylor from Off the Record to join us, because they've logged in now and they've joined the conversation. They will kick off this guest speakers edition in this new lineup that we've had. I hope you guys, by the way, have been coping all right with the lockdown that took place recently. Obviously we've come off it now, which is great news for all of us. I'm looking forward to going back swimming. And I'm looking forward to going to a few restaurants and doing some other things in Christmas, actually. You've got to enjoy it, whilst you have it at the end of the day, because we don't know when we're going back into it. We don't know, to be honest. Hello, Righteousness Believe. Hello. Yeah, exactly. Lockdown over, Flourishing Diversity. Lockdown over. Might be better for you guys if I move my camera, actually. Yeah. So just for those of you who are waiting and everything, we're waiting for Matthew Taylor from Off the Record to join us, basically. So yeah, we can talk about the fight, flight and freeze response, which is a kind of a psychological system that works and determines our responses to dangerous situations most of the time. I mean, for those of us involved kind of not only in criminal justice, but more specifically kind of in gang crime and youth violence. These things, hi, Russians believe, fellow. Yeah, these things are very, these things are very kind of, we cover this subject a lot in our field because we come across a lot of young people and you hear some crazy stories kind of about, young people on high speed chases away from the cops and the kind of dangerous situations they get involved in actually. And a lot of that is determined by how you respond to situations, how you deal with them, and what you think is right to do when a particular circumstance arrives. So off the record has said, hi Jerome, I'm here just trying to see if I can request to join. Yeah, we're waiting for you, Matthew. We'll look forward to having the discussion with you. Actually, just out of curiosity, if any of you guys want to respond to this, I'm interested to hear it. Have any of you heard of the flight, fight, and freeze response before? I'm interested in putting that question out there for you guys. Yeah, hopefully Matthew will be able to join us soon and we'll be able to begin. Let me see something. So flourishing diversity. Oh, I see. No, you might be right. Flourishing diversity, because I mean, most of us, or a lot of us, would have heard of fight or flight, but yeah, freeze is a different one. But it is true. A lot of people do freeze actually when certain things happen. Yeah, Mr. Michael River agrees with you, flourishing diversity, and yeah, it's true. Yeah, you don't usually hear the freeze part, but it is a response. It is a response. Some people clam up, especially if they're forced into a violent situation. Hi, Camera Jan. Hello. Okay. I wonder if... Hang on. Let's give... Hello, Rhyme shit. Hi. Yeah, just waiting for Matthew Taylor. Just give me 1 second. I will get in contact with him and see if we can assist him in joining the live. Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, back again. Yeah, just spoke to Matthew. So yeah, he's trying to get in basically. Probably had a few browser issues. Technology is a bit crazy like that. Hi, Range Music. Yeah, cool. Yeah, nice to see you, man. Nice to see you. Actually, Range Music, do you make music actually? And if you do, what kind of music do you make? Hey James Armstrong. Hello, good to see you as well. Yeah, James, since you and a few others have just joined us, we're waiting for Matthew Taylor from Off the Record. He'll be, we'll be doing a workshop with him today about the flight, fight, and freeze response. Just to see, so we can relate this to what a lot of young people go through and what they may encounter actually in the future as well. Is an interesting topic, a very interesting topic. I mean, it's like this is probably one of the key ones that affects young people alongside things like trauma. Trauma does affect young people massively, and these topics, they're not covered enough from a rehabilitative and youth violence angle actually. And particularly not for gang crime and stuff like that. A lot of people talk about trauma and you'll think, as you go through trauma, you're weak because you've experienced that. Also, Off the Record will be joining us now.
Hello.
Hello. Hey, Matthew. Good to see you.
Hey, I do apologize for all the tech delays. It's the first time I'm doing IG lives on this side, so it's been a bit crazy.
No, no problem. No, it's good to see you here. And yeah, we've been having like a lot of people said actually, because I introduced you and everything, and I'll let you introduce yourself formally, what you do for your company and what your company does actually, because it is a terrific company. But yeah, I was saying a lot of people. I said our topic today is fight, flight, and freeze. That response system. And actually, a lot of people were saying in the chat they've never heard of the freeze part of it, which I found quite interesting actually.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. Yeah, technically there's more than three technically, so there's actually some others that have been added over the years as more research is done into how we respond to these situations. Technically, I think there's five that I'm aware of. There's fight, flight, freeze, friend, and flop.
Yeah.
But I can explain a little bit more about those ones as we get into it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay. So, basically, I would like to let you introduce yourself. As I said, you're Matthew Taylor, but you work for Off the Record. Just explain to us a little bit about what Off the Record does and what you do within your company.
Yeah, for sure. So, firstly, good evening, everyone, and just to apologize for those tech delays. But yeah, so off the record, we're a young person's mental health charity. And if you've seen the image that the guys at Untitled posted, we've been around for over 25 years in Croydon initially. So the main support that we offer young people is counselling support. And just over the years, it's just expanded to include so many different ways that we support young people with their mental health and well-being. We operate across Croydon, Sutton, and Merton. And yeah, depending on our service, in one of our services, we start from age 7, but across the board, we go up to the age of 25, supporting young people with their mental health and well-being. So yeah, there's quite a few different parts to our services. You can see on the image there, we have a dedicated BME, an outreach team. We have a young carer service, have an online counselling service and a workshop service, in addition to the three main counselling teams as well. And we also have a young refugee service too. Hopefully I haven't forgotten anyone.
No, but do you know what, Matthew? That's an amazing amount of people that you guys provide services for, and it's just it's really heartening to hear that because a lot of people they neglect the implications that mental health has on all of us. And obviously today we're covering the fight, flies, and freeze response in kind of relation to gang and youth violence. But I mean, more generally speaking, these subjects are overlooked. People look at mental health as though it's not that important. And actually, it's tremendously important. There's nothing more important than your mind. There's nothing more important in it, probably. Your mind affects your body and how everything you do and the way that you behave, respond, and the way you live, actually. So it's
Yeah.
great to have an organization like you here.
No, I appreciate that. No, everyone's doing their part. You guys know how I feel about the work that you guys do, and I think it's great that we can bring the two worlds together in this way, and hopefully get into some really good conversations with everyone in the chat box as well, and really unpick this.
No, definitely. All right, then. So now that we've got you to introduce yourself and everything, we can, I guess, kick off the meeting, and I'll begin by answering you a few questions and referencing that really against situations that those of us who have encountered these problems in our communities have noticed about these kind of things, and also referencing them just to kind of trying to inspect this particular issue. So now I'll begin by asking you, please explain to us and break down to us what is the fight, flight, and freeze response system.
Yeah, sure. It's a really important place to start. So the fight, flight, and freeze system. If we go back to being in our caveman days and being around big creatures and all these kind of things, if that's what you subscribe to, this fight and flight system, it's our innate survival system. So it has evolved over the years where, if you say our caveman ancestors, they would always be on the lookout for threats and danger, because anything they step towards, eat, could kill them. They could literally walk out and be eaten by a creature. So they developed responses to that, to be on alert to potential threats and dangers. And over the years and years and years, the system has become so innate in us that, as opposed to, I need to not get eaten by this big dinosaur, it's, someone might think negatively about me, or I might fail this exam, or I might not get this job, or, things like that become the same threats that we perceive might kill us. So, yeah, it's a defense system to things that we perceive might kill us, or actually might harm us or threaten us.
Okay, all right. So thank you for that introduction and giving us an overview of what this psychological system is. Now, from Unique Talent's angle and from our standpoint, I'm going to throw some things out there at you and question you on these things. And we'll get really to the crux of this matter, because as much as it may not seem like a big deal and an important system, actually it is a very important system. And you and I have spoken about this, and it is a very deep thing for a lot of young people. So for many of us in our communities, at the end of the day, from young ages, usually from the age of usually 13 upwards, many young people go to school even, and they're carrying weapons with them. In Unique Talent, we have a concept, it's called the climate of fear. And what this is about, effectively, is when you grow up in certain communities and environments that are heavily affected by gangs and youth crime and youth violence, you begin to conceive in your mind and perceive that the outside world actually is a threat to you. And as you walk out your front door, you can kind of note the fact that there are gangs all around the area. And as a result of that, you feel heavily threatened and in a state of fear and in a state of panic, actually, in your area. When I was growing up, when we were younger, we used to have things in communities called strips. Now, these strips are kind of local hotspots in the community where gangs would congregate. So in my area back in the day, this was in the days of the two notorious, who became eventually notorious gangs, DSN and Gypsy and SMN. And back then, McDonald's in Croydon, that used to be a big hotspot for the gangs. Croydon Clock Tower, where the library was, another hotspot for gangs, and West Croydon bus station. You are likely to encounter the gangs in your community in those three areas, actually, and in particular parts of other areas as well. So when young people are subjected to these environments, they're constantly feeling that, as I said, that they're in fear for their personal safety. For example, if you would not go into those areas or those particular parts of Croydon alone, basically, or by yourself, because you know that a group of boys are likely to approach you and they call it move to you. They'll try to rob you, take your stuff from you. On the back of that now, and kind of how it is for young people who are growing up in those environments, can you break it down for us? What is it in those scenarios and in those situations, in that climate of fear, that will make people respond differently to different situations? So when young people are going through an area, at the end of the day, what will make them freeze, fight, or flight according to the particular situations? And as you answer this, I'm going to throw some situations at you, like I said, actually, that are real life situations that have happened to those in our company and also to the young people that we work with.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Let's get into it. But I think what I first want to mention in response to that is, firstly, to always hold in mind that all of these responses, or the system that we're talking about, we all have it, and I think the situations that you're talking about now, those are actual situations that are a threat to someone. So it makes sense that that system is always on. So it's just always just worth bearing in mind that the threat is there. So this system's going to be activated, and then there's going to be a whole range of biological responses because of that. So that's just the first thing to really bear in mind. The second thing is that we can't choose these responses because it's about survival. So to answer your question, is that the response you will give out is what your instinct will believe is the best option for you to survive. And it will do any one of those responses to do that. So it really is dependent on the person's perhaps abilities themselves, what they're capable of, and the specific, and the context, the environment that they're in. So if they're, I'm jumping ahead perhaps, but perhaps if they're being moved to and they're surrounded, flight is no longer an option. So then perhaps it'll be fight, but then because they're outnumbered, they don't want to fight back or they can't fight back, so they freeze. That, it really just depends on the situation. So they might freeze, and in that scenario they might freeze, or they may, so I mentioned the other two, flop or friend, right? So freeze in this scenario would be completely frozen still, can't move, can't speak, mind shuts down, and just whatever happens. Friend in that scenario would be trying to negotiate a way out. Like, it's just instinctual. It's like, the responses of, oh no, but me, I know so and so, like, we're cool, like, just trying to negotiate your way out of it. And it's just like, you're not really thinking, it's sort of just automatic, it's happening. So that would be the friend response, right? Flop would be your body just goes limp almost, as a way to reduce how much pain you're feeling if anything happens. And then you just go with whatever happens. So whatever's being asked of you, you just go along with it, because that might be the best way for you to survive.
But very interesting, very interesting. I'm going to home in on 2 points that you mentioned, but Flourishing Diversity has asked a question. She said, are your reaction based on past experiences also?
Yeah, I mean, that's really good. I mean, it's an interesting one because it's, who's that, Florence? Yeah, really good. Flourishing Diversity, really good point there. It's where do our instincts come from? It can be based on our past experiences. So what we do and what we perhaps are exposed to outside of these moments that give us these responses can definitely then become automatic responses. So an example might be someone who's never had a fight before in their life, versus someone who's like a trained boxer. In an altercation, you'd imagine that the trained boxer, just instinct takes over and they go into their technique, right? So some of their past experiences might play in. And for example, if someone before had a really horrible experience, where I think you mentioned, where if they've been moved to and it went really horrible, the next time a similar situation might happen, it triggers that memory and they might just freeze at the very sight of a group of guys or a gang hanging, maybe not even approaching them, but maybe just across the road. They may completely freeze because what happened before is they got moved to.
Yeah, no, thank you for that answer. And you know what? You've touched on a number of points. And now I want to hone down on 2 of them. Because what you've actually turned around and said is, look, we all have this response system. And it's subject to circumstance and to some extent, as you explained later on, kind of, what you may have experienced. But you see, there is something in particular with young people in our communities, especially from a certain walk of life, and a certain type of youth subculture, particularly urban street subculture, actually, which is that your responses to these things will not necessarily be conceived as natural in many instances. They will judge you on the basis of your response. So, for example, a young guy is hanging out somewhere on the street. A group of 5 boys come and moved him. Even if those boys stuck him up with a knife, in many instances, if that young person either tried to run away and tried to escape the situation, or if they froze in that moment and got their goods or their phone or whatever robbed from them, their friends may turn around to them and say, and many of them will in this type of youth subculture, and say, you're weak, you're a coward, actually. And all the time, and I'll be interested to get your feedback on this, because you're mentioning a natural system. Actually, you don't choose this system, but you nevertheless, your inability to fight in that moment, to many young people, that will get you seen as weak. So I just want, what is your kind of your thoughts and reflections on the way young people are perceiving actually their responses to these things, actually, or the responses of them and their friends?
Yeah, for sure. I think, it's a really tough situation to be in. I sort of view that almost like a double threat. So you have the immediate threat of the people in front of you moving to you, but you have the threat of the judgments that come out of what's next. And, depending on the person's view of their peers, if they particularly value them really highly or whatever, and their opinions highly, then that may lead to a choice there. But I think it speaks more to how society views our responses to the system, particularly around men, and the sort of stereotypes that may be around men, and having to be macho and brave and courageous and things like that. I think that feeds into how we view people's responses, for sure. There's a culture and a systemic influence that plays a part in this too, which can make it really, really difficult, because we're talking about a system that's about survival, so it's automatic, it's instinct. It's very harsh to judge someone on doing something that's going to help them to survive and live another day. But there is almost like a culture where it's it's better to fight and die than it is to run and live.
That for many of us, that is how it is, actually. Especially when you're at that age, and young people, especially those who have never been involved, like, and seen or even heard, like, kind of seen any of their friends get stabbed. They will think to themselves, this is a do or die kind of situation, and I'm happy to get involved in that until you get into it, actually. And then you'll notice you won't really want to be in that situation. You would have rather run in that situation. I just want to touch on this kind of from Unique Talent's perspective, because we are against the misconceptions that are put out there, basically, not just about how men should behave, but about how young people should behave, and this negative this negative part of urban street culture at the end of the day. Someone told me, actually, when I was younger, and it's very probably a true point. He said, those of us who know how to fight, now this came from a former kickboxing world champion. He said, those of us who know how to fight want to fight the least, actually, in the first place. That's what he actually said. And he's not the first person that said that to me. But so this is something that it touches on very deep about something. And I would be interested to know your point about this, because someone said something to me. And in not only my own personal experiences, but also I think what I've seen out there as well, and even in the field that I work with, there was a guy who told me something, and he also was a great fighter. And he said, look, as a great fighter, he said, to be good at fighting or to become a great fighter, you either have to be born that way, or something has to make you that way, actually. And for a lot of people, I think, they'll go through heavy amounts of trauma, and then they will become that kind of person, which is something I'm going to touch on in a lot more detail with you, actually, because it is a big problem for our communities, actually, in terms of what happens. But I want to get your response to this idea that some people are born to fight, basically. And for a lot of people, though, actually, situations change them and make them that way. They make them become fighters. And how is that involved in the freeze, fight, or flight response system? How is it possible that someone's actually able to change their system? Because in my experiences, I've seen people be able to change their system, where a person might naturally freeze with enough time and enough energy in their mind at the end of the day. They might just turn around and be able to fight instead. And then that can escalate and turn into other things. But like I said, I'll touch on that later. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge question there. And there's a lot that could be said. Um, yeah, I think it's really important there to really connect with this idea. I think I'll show it actually. This is why I was pausing. So how I like to think of not only just the fight and flight system, but um, often our capacity of how much stress we can hold, right? So you're mentioning there that if someone's often freezing over time, it changes for them. So I sort of think of it, you guys see me drinking this water, it's thirsty. But anyway, so I kind of think of us as these bottles, right? And every bottle has water, and we will have different amounts of water that we hold. The water can represent our stress, for example, and our feelings. So life is happening, the water's coming in all the time, right? Now, we're all different bottles. Some are going to be a 1.5 liter bottle, some are going to be a 500 milliliter bottle. We're all going to be different bottles, right? And depending on that, what's going to be a healthy level of stress that we can hold will differ. So I might be able to have half a bottle of stress, and that's a healthy level for me. I can function really well with that. Some people, it's down here. For some people, they can hold quite a lot. And as more stress and emotions are pouring in, and we're holding it in, this is building up over time, and our responses begin to change the more stress we're holding. And so when we get near the top of our bottle, this is where the sort of the irritation, the snapping, and everything starts happening, because suddenly we're only able to hold less stress. It takes less stress to fill up this bottle now because we're up here. And then we get near the top and we spiral out. We gush out, we lash out, we get really angry. So if you're holding stress up here all the time, if you're always on edge all the time, that's that 0 to 100 thing that we talk about. You know, literally going from I can be calm 1 minute and then something small happens and I've completely overreacted. I've lost it. I might be crying. I might be lashing out. I might be, you know, this is where it happens. And then we get stuck in that cycle because we're constantly on edge.
Interesting.
But the interesting thing with this as well is that depending on how we're managing our stress, you know, the size of our container changes. You know, we can experience, depending on, so if we experience like trauma and stuff like that, it might be that we have a very small container, or it might be that we have a really large one. And suddenly, because you hear from a lot of people who have been through really difficult experiences, that suddenly someone else's stress to them really is a really small thing. It's not even a big issue. It's like, why are you worrying about that? There's bigger things that have happened or can happen. But that's because they've been through something really bad. And so where you're mentioning that someone's at the beginning would freeze, and then they change, it may just be, you know, they've been through it so many times now, it's no longer as big a threat to them. They've almost become conditioned to the fact that this situation is no longer a threat. So they can now act differently.
Very, very interesting. Because, you know, at the end of the day, when it comes to it, these issues, just to go through some of my own experiences when I was younger, these issues now, in terms, especially when we touched on the subject that young men are being, like, partly by society, partly by, you know, just kind of cultural norms and that kind of thing, conditioned to think that they must be brave and strong and do all of these things. People have not noted or understood really how far that can go and become. Because you see, for many young people, that may just mean, or maybe the majority of young people actually in the country as a whole, that may mean, you know, a boy hits me and I hit them back. And that means I'm a strong guy now, kind of. But it changes according to the type of area you live in and the type of social conditions and circumstances you live in. Because when I was at school, a lot of us guys basically in school, just to give a few examples, many of us used to carry weapons at the end of the day. But, you know, there was and these weapons would vary in their scope and their ways. Some people would be carrying hammers into school. Other people who I knew, basically, they would keep nails in their pocket, metal nails, and put it in their knuckles. So if ever they had to engage with anyone, they would do that thing. And you see, it's like a seed, isn't it, in a sense? Because once you're sitting there conditioning the young person, you have to be brave, you have to be strong, you have to never back down from anything, actually. What happens when the situations get more violent and more deadly at the end of the day? You say to the young person, listen, never make anybody rob you. Never let them take anything out of your pocket or anything like that. So at the end of the day, when a group of 5 guys comes, when 5 of them and all four of the 5 have knives on them, so you still shouldn't run. What do you do in that situation? Because remember, the young person he's already been trained in a certain way of thinking, that he has to be strong and brave, and he has to uphold his reputation and his self-esteem. And I think self-esteem is a big part of this. And in that situation, he has 2 options, really, doesn't he? It's either he sits there, he fights with his fist, and he decides that he's going to get stabbed on that day, or he makes sure when he ever comes back into that situation, he carries an even bigger weapon. And so people will move from their fist to their knife to a gun eventually. It's a scale of how far you need to go to protect yourself, to protect your self-esteem, really, and your reputation in the eyes and image of others, and uphold this kind of thing, and and be someone who you're not usually. And I want to get your response to that, Matthew, but I also want to just highlight something about Unique Talent. Listen, Unique Talent are a community rehabilitation company. We rehabilitate young offenders and young people. And a part of that is changing the mindset in our society. So from Unique Talent, we would like to say something specifically to young men out there, but also to young women, because there are young women who go through a lot of stuff and they feel they have to live up to something as well. There's nothing wrong with you being a peaceful person. Matthew has studied psychology at the end of the day, and he works for a counselling service. And he's telling you that there's a natural bodily response that you naturally have when you enter a circumstance. So what that means ultimately is there's nothing wrong with you if you run away from a circumstance. That doesn't make you a coward. And it's not necessary for you to have to change the way you are. As a company, and I'm sure I hope Matthew Webber agrees, but as a company, there's nothing wrong with not naturally being able to fight in a situation. You don't have to fight in every situation. And if you keep believing that you have to fight in every situation, that is a scale that goes upwards. Because at the end of the day, it's either 2 scales. If you believe that you have to rise to every situation that you find yourself in, you may either get yourself killed in a situation, or you may spend life in jail for murder eventually. Because that scale only goes in 2 ways, really, on either side. And both of them are terrible. Not only for yourself, but for the consequences that it has on your community and the people, your loved ones around you. But Matthew, I'll let you respond to all of that, because I think it is food for thought to say to young people, they can be peaceful. You don't have to be violent, actually. There's nothing wrong with you being violent. I mean, sorry, there's nothing wrong with you not being violent.
And yet, there's something that really needs to be acknowledged in what you're saying is how tough being in that situation must be, to feel so trapped that they don't feel like they have that choice. We have to really, I guess, tap into that reality there, that there's a perception that's really difficult. And that's why you guys work with their mindset to view these things differently. But yeah, I think it's a really, really horrible and difficult things to be trapped in. Yeah. So I'm really with that, empathizing in that, with that scenario there of being so trapped that the choice really is fight or die in these situations.
Yeah.
It's really difficult. But I think what's really important to be aware of, well, there's quite a few things to be important to be aware of with this, is that the choices that we can make, we can't choose our fight or flight or freeze response or friend or flop. We can't choose that. That's automatic. what we can do, and this is where like you come in, where we come in, it's how can we work with our stress before those situations, before those environments, and how do we manage ourselves after those situations? Because in those situations, so the fight and flight, some of the biological stuff that happens is our adrenaline spikes, our heart rate increases, you know, where our blood is pumping around our body. This is all the things that it's preparing us to do. One thing that people seem to sometimes overlook as well is that sort of nauseous feeling in your stomach you get when you're really feeling anxious or really stressed. That's part of the fight flight system. What's happening there is your digestive system is relaxing because it wants you to be as light as possible, so that if you need to run away, you're quicker, or if you need to fight, you know, you're not being held back by anything. So that's why we get that strong urge to either want to go to the toilet, perhaps. That's what some people experience. The sweaty palms, all these things are happening, right? And this is the system activating. It's telling us what's happening. So if we can understand what are specific signs that we show in when our system is activating, that's what we can learn to manage. You know, that's what we can need to learn to work with, to understand that, one, it's normal. We all have these responses. Some people don't get sweaty palms. Some people do. Some people get shallow breathing. Some people don't. It's working with that, but understanding that first and foremost is important. So learning what we call them triggers. So learning what our signs are and what triggers us. Once we learn the signs of what it is happening in our bodies that is triggering us, and once we learn what the sort of events are, or the environments are, or the thoughts are that trigger us, and that those can be a mixture of physical things and emotional things. And it takes time to really unpack that. But once we start to understand those few things, then we can learn how best to take care of ourselves, how best to manage our stress. And like I said, after that, if we do get overwhelmed and we find ourselves in these situations, what can we then do to ground and calm ourselves down, bring us back into the present moment, bring us back to a feeling of safety? So there's a real process here that a lot of people don't get access to understand what is happening for them. And they're walking around every day feeling these signs and symptoms, and perhaps associating it with being on edge, being under threat, always on guard, and then behaving in certain ways that may attract more difficulties.
Yeah. That's fascinating in what you said. And I want to just touch on 2 points now from our company's lived experience, and also touch on something about the experiences of our clients and the young people we mentor, because you've mentioned something about kind of the bodily system, like, the heart beating basically. And the truth is, for someone, it's an interesting thing, because the fight, flight, or freeze response involves certain emotions. And whether you are doing something that you shouldn't be doing, actually, or whether you are doing something that could be seen as more positive to do in a situation, actually the same emotions come into effect. So for people who commit violent offenses against people, usually the level of fear, as someone who is experiencing a violent level of violent threat, is often the same in a lot of threats. The heart racing and all of these kind of things. Your heart does accelerate when people do that kind of thing. When they commit a violent offense against someone, your heart accelerates, actually. And from when you're trying to run away from someone attacking you, your heart accelerates then as well, actually. And what I find interesting is kind of your take on how it is, because you see, when I learned about something which is maybe kind of linked to the discussion that we're having right now, and it's a psychological theory, and it's another bodily kind of body system theory, and it's the threat system, the drive system, and the self-soothing system. Yeah. And the fact is, for many people who commit a violent offense, this is I'm going to give you an insight now into the perception of oh, excuse me, sorry, the perception of people who commit certain types of offenses and go into things. Because you see, if you understood psychology and the systems that you and I are now speaking about, actually, you would understand that when you go into a violent altercation or commit a violent offense against somebody, whether that be shooting, stabbing, or hitting someone, is the same thing. Not the same thing, sorry, but same kind of emotions involved. In the end, your heart accelerating is actually a part of your threat system, probably telling you that maybe you shouldn't be doing what you're supposed to be doing at the moment. But you see, for many young people and for many people who commit these kind of offenses, when they feel their heart accelerating, to them, that's just something they have to put to one side and they have to suppress in that moment. That's weakness in that moment, actually. Yeah.
I think as well, I think we have to understand that when we're talking about young people, we're talking about different scales of, say, emotional intelligence, say, for example. Mm-hmm. So we might understand that it's that heart racing as the threat, relating to threat and fear, but it could easily also be confused with excitement.
Yes, yeah.
So I think it is, I just want to add that in, but yeah, sorry, continue.
No, I think, yeah, no, that's a very valid point. And Joe, just the last thing I'll just say on this before I move on to another question is actually, there are many of our clients, you know, we are forced to mediate conflicts with, or we attempt to mediate conflicts between them and other rival gang members. And the fact is, a lot of our clients turn down the mediation process, actually. And sometimes this could be because, you know, they think, I can handle my own business. I don't need your help at the end of the day, you know. And again, it comes down to that reputation thing. You know, we're offering you the help in that moment to resolve this and shake hands with the person at the end, hopefully. But you don't want to do that. You kind of want to handle it your own way. And as a rehabilitative organization, we don't look at that and we don't judge that because we understand their perception. But we also understand, because of our experiences, that's never necessarily the right way to deal with this kind of to deal with this thing that you're involved in. But I want to move on to something else now, Matthew. Because hang on, just give me a second, please, because right, just in terms of kind of the way people change their responses to things, because you mentioned quite authoritatively, actually, that you can change not necessarily the response itself, but you can monitor the triggers that lead to the response, and also know perhaps how to soothe yourself or get yourself back to, you know, a straight thinking mind, kind of, when you're in those situations. And what I want to go through is, how is it people actually change their responses to situations? And I will contrast that with certain things that I noticed in my own journey about things.
Yeah, great point. Just want to touch on something you mentioned there about the mind shutting down. That's part of this fight and flight system too. I'm not sure if people understand that fully either. If we're thinking about instinct, reaction, life or death situations, you know, our bodies are very clever. They understand that in those situations, there probably isn't time to make a logical plan. We just have to act. So the logical part of our brain does begin to shut down, and logical thinking becomes difficult to do when we're in this state. And I think that's really important to understand. You know, sometimes people really judge themselves when they're in certain situations and, you know, they go blank and they can't speak. But it's just really important to understand that, you know, your logical brain has shut down because it's all about instinct and survival. And so by learning how to ground, that's when, and calm and tap into our soothing system, that's when we can then re-engage with logical thinking again. So we need to give ourselves time to do that. But what you mentioned there as well is very key. And I think I see it in the chat by Flourish and Diversity. A lot of young people and a lot of adults, let's be real here, a lot of young people, a lot of adults aren't in tune with how to recognize what they're feeling. And then also know how to communicate what it is they're feeling. And so the easiest thing to do, and then depending on the threatening environment or whatever we're in, is to bottle that up. And then, like I said, what happens earlier is then you bottle it up, it builds, and then you just be on edge all the time. So you can really see that, you know, awareness is really important. It's a really important first step to hold to even understand how to soothe. You need to know why you're soothing. But we don't get those lessons often, or a lot of us don't get those lessons well enough. And then depending on you know, what you were taught when you were younger or growing up, you may have learned how to soothe differently. You know, and that's often where people can perhaps turn to, say, alcohol or drugs, or, you know, things that seem to give them that hit or that relief, because they don't know any other way.
That's a very big point about drug use. A lot of the drug use of the young people we work with is because of trauma. They've been through so much stuff, and all they think is, I have to smoke weed now. I have to smoke weed because if I do that, it's going to help ease what I'm going through. And many of them will not even be thinking that consciously. It's a subconscious thing for many of them. It's just that, do you know what? I just feel that I have to hit this zoo every night, kind of thing. They don't really know why. To them, it's just because they're having a good time. But a lot of the time, it is because they've gone through a lot of stuff, and that's their coping mechanism.
Yeah, everything we're doing is a way of coping. You know, everything we do. And the important thing is to learn the more healthier coping strategies. I think often as well, people are very quick to be like, stop doing that, you know, the unhealthy stuff. But then don't actually take the time to explore what's going to be healthy. You know, what can you do instead that's going to give you perhaps a similar feeling, but isn't going to do you or someone else harm. And we're not necessarily given that time to explore what these things are, or to understand that as we grow and as times change, that our needs change. So we may need to do a different coping strategy. You know, but it's important. I see, is it righteousness, believe? It's important to be seen and heard. You know, have the space for someone to sit down and actually hear what's going on for you. But what we know is that when you're in these difficult environments, and, you know, even currently, everyone is in a pandemic, right? We have COVID going on. That's had a huge impact on young people. There's a huge impact on how people are. There's been a lot of studies that's been going around really reviewing how it's impacting young people's stress levels. And, you know, depending on your background, depending on your experience, the last few lockdowns would have hit certain people even harder. Like if you're having to be in a very difficult home environment, but you're locked down in that environment, imagine the impact on that person's mental health.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you know what? I want to we'll conclude soon, but there's just a few follow-up questions I want to get and ask you. This has been a great discussion, and I hope everyone watching has enjoyed the discussion and been able to gather some knowledge from this, and especially young people watching this, questioning their responses to things, thinking they have to live up to something, which is about nature, actually, not really about a reputation. It's just about who you are and what you're going to do in a situation. There's nothing wrong or right about it necessarily, but there is something that I do want to focus on, because in terms of, you said used the water bottle analogy, and you've spoken about water kind of, and our stress levels getting to a certain point, basically, where we can always be on edge. And then you've also spoken about something else as well, which is ultimately, it can become the new norm for you, being in a situation. Now, I'll tackle this in different ways, basically, in explaining this situation. Because you see, for people, and this again is from the rehabilitative kind of standpoint of our company and our experiences as a company, basically, being people that basically are ex-offenders in this kind of thing. A lot of young people don't seem to understand something in the end of it. If I did speak about my rehabilitative journey, when I got to a point, actually, when I realized that some of my experiences in the past, the biggest victory certain people had over me wasn't necessarily actually the fact that they were able to get my phone when I was younger. It's actually that they had an influence in making me or influencing me to become a different type of person when I grew up even years later, and the long-term effects of that, actually. So for me, and this will be true for a lot of other young people as well, basically, I spoke about the scale of things. And you can graduate and you can go up the scale of what you are able to do, basically, and prepared to do. And this is all obviously interlinked with the system of fight, flight, and freeze that we're talking about. Because you can, and I've done it, you can change your responses from being something that is freeze or flight to becoming fight eventually. But you see, how do I put it? Eventually, you will get to a point where how far do you go with that now? And what point does it lead to you to at the end of the day? And being a type of person who is naturally peaceful, you can reverse that chain inside yourself, actually, and become somebody who's no longer naturally peaceful. And if you are a victim of crime or anything like that, or of gangs or any other type of crime, that's the biggest victory, actually, that gang members or these type of people who commit offenses can get over you, actually, which is changing you. And that's what I would like to actually just focus on with young people. Be yourselves. Because at the end of the day, do not let your environment and these things change you. Just in terms of that build-up, though, and understanding that issue a bit more, when people are able to change their mentality, their system and their mentality, basically, so that they are able to kind of be a fighter instead of a flight person or a freeze person, how do you not reverse it necessarily? How do you change that? Because if they were able to change their system, how can they change it back? And then I'll give kind of my intake on it as someone who rehabilitated on how I kind of did do it. But I would love to get the psychological angle on this.
Well, I think again, it's really important to highlight that you know, we can't necessarily choose our response when we're in that fight or flight system, but it's our system evolves to what's best going to keep us safe. And if we learned that freezing or fleeing doesn't keep us safe because we still keep getting moved to or whatever, then our system will then think, okay, this time I'm going to fight. And then if that works out, then of course the next time the best thing to do is to fight. And then you keep fighting, because actually running away, freezing, all the other responses didn't work. It didn't keep you safe. And there's also something about, you know, that saying, offense being the best defense. You know, these sayings come from somewhere. Because if you're always on the offense, there's a belief that you're in more control. Because you're the one that's dishing out the offense. And so, again, if we think about what this flight or flight system is about, it's about how best can we keep ourselves safe? How best can we survive? So the system will always revert to what it thinks is going to be the best thing to do that, to achieve that goal. And it might not necessarily be the right thing, but it will be the thing. And I think we need to not judge people fully on the responses in those moments, and think about what's happened in that build up towards it. But I think leading back to your point of how do you work with that. So if your system acknowledges that the best thing to be safe is that I have to be violent, aggressive, keep people at a distance, and things like that. Actually, it's about really exploring and understanding that when you're not in those threatening situations, that you're safe, that you are safe, and that you don't, that your system can allow itself to not be on alarm all the time, and understanding that how to be aware. Again, it goes back to being aware of those signs, symptoms, triggers, behaviors that the person experiences when their system begins to activate, and understanding how to soothe those. And once they can do that more regularly and better manage perhaps even their baseline stress, that then allows them to be able to make better decisions around environments. And I think that speaks more to what you're speaking about. It's how can they make better decisions around those environments and their involvement in those environments. But safety is the key thing. If you feel safe or safer, and you believe that you're safer, then you're more likely to be able to make better decisions.
No, yeah, thank you for that, Matthew. Look, I'll wrap up on 3 points, because just from my perspective, and if I share with all of you kind of my journey on this kind of thing, you know, I just got to a point really where I had to look at it and just say, do you know what? Actually, I know I'm not that kind of person. I don't like to fight. It's that simple. And I don't need to want to like to fight. No matter how many different influences around me growing up over time taught me to kind of think that that was the way I had to be. And on the back of my understanding of that and my acceptance of myself, my self-esteem could no longer get wounded by being in a situation where I could be seen as a victim. And by also understanding that in the end, you know, when I was 14 or so, and a lot of things that were going on for me at that time, I wanted to be, you know, a strong person in a particular type of context. Then I grew up and I became a strong person from a particular type of context. And what I understood is it did not help me, actually. It actually hindered my life and also hurt the loved ones that were around me, a lot of it. So the fact is, accepting yourself, accepting actually that to be a peaceful person is not a weakness, it is a strength, and redefining the concept of strength for yourself at the end of the day. This is why I'm telling young people, and I'm saying this to young people at the end of the day, as someone who's been there kind of and done it basically, and realizes, no, I don't see what I did as strong actually. I see it in some ways as weak, and also I realize that the real strength is being yourself. And if you're filled with peace, keep it that way. We would, I don't know, me, I think, sure, Unique Talent and Off the Record, I think would love to see you live in peace at the end of the day, for the days of your life. The only last thing I would say is that we have to keep in mind, because we speak about the scale for a lot of young people. And I think it's vital, actually, that services like my service and like Matthew's service exist. Because I can tell you the truth about the situation when we were younger. And it probably is the same to this day, actually. Actually, I know it is the same. And I know it is the same because I'm going to reference it against an example of a client that we have. At the end of the day, when I was younger, there could be a lot of people carrying weapons. But out of the people carrying the weapons when we were younger, 80% of them would never use the weapon. And in the street and in the so-called hood or whatever you call it, we call that you don't have the heart to use it. So which means you don't have the willpower to use the weapon for what it was designed for in the first place. But most 80% of young people who are carrying the weapon, they won't use it actually. They don't have that in them to use it. And it's right, and that's a good thing about them. That's a good thing that they still have that kind of conscience and those kind of systems which will protect them from doing devastation to someone else or possibly doing devastation to themselves. And like I said, it was that way when I was younger, and for young people today, it's still that way. We had a client, he went and he robbed someone for their bike. Now he robbed their bike. Later, little did he know that the family of the boy that they robbed was going to come back. And when they came back in a serious, dangerous way for them. And they chased these guys, they chased our client basically into a restaurant. Our client had to lock himself in the toilet. He was crying at the time. And then he was on the phone to the police themselves, actually, after he just robbed the bike. Now, this is not, now the thing is, other people are going to sit around and say about this young person, oh, he was a coward. He was this, he was that. No, what I look at when I saw that circumstance, this young person was not naturally that kind of person. He's not naturally a fight person. Actually, probably a good guy in a lot of ways if he stripped out all of his peer associations and all of the negative concepts that he believes in. He's probably quite a good kid at the end of the day who is more suited to a peaceful situation. But he tried to get involved in a violent situation, and then when a real level of violence hit him in that moment, it exposed that he's not that kind of person. And that's a good thing for him. It's a good thing that hopefully he's one of the 80% that will never use the weapon. That's a good thing that they're like that. And to me, you know, that is how I would really end what we have to say on this issue. But obviously, Matthew, I'd like you to kind of wrap up and conclude, you know, because you've given us a great insight actually into how to deal with these things.
Yeah, no, and yeah, no, thank you for sharing that story, because I think it speaks true for a lot of people's experiences when you're going in extreme environments. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that we don't have to be products of our environment. I think ultimately that's what you're saying. You know, we can choose how we want our lives to be, and make as many better choices for us as possible. And when I say better choices, I mean healthier choices for us. So I guess, you know, just to really, you know, bring it back to this fight and flight system, I think the main things I would like people to take away, who's still logged in with us, is, you know, really understanding the system being a innate biological system that we all have, and that the various responses that happen within that, whether it be the racing thoughts, the racing heart, sweaty palms, whatever is involved in that. And there's a lot of things I could list, but I'm wrapping up. But yeah, all the biological responses, you know, being familiar with those that are occurring for you, understanding that we can't choose those fight, flight, freeze, friend, flock responses. They are automatic. They are instinctual to keep us safe, to help us survive. Actual threats, like being moved to or things like that, or perceived threats. And that could be about what people will think of me. You know, it can be that too. That can be a perceived threat to our self-esteem, who we are. Essentially, situations that make us vulnerable can trigger the system. So it's innate, we all have it, and it's automatic. But what we can do is learn how to better manage our stress, to better look after ourselves, to understand what triggers us in these environments. What is it that actually triggers this system in us? What is it that raises my stress? And then understand, how to look after ourselves in situations, how to ground when the stress peaks, how to have these conversations around what we're feeling, what we're going through. And I would encourage people to, you know, make referrals for people to or encourage people to access services like ours, like both of us here, to be able to have those conversations safely, because it might be that in their peer group, in their environment, young people can't have those conversations, or feel like they can't have those conversations. So definitely encourage people to speak more, and to take the time for themselves, because that's the biggest investment they can make, is in themselves.
Fantastic. Do you know what, Matthew, that's a terrific round off actually, and this has been a great discussion. Listen, we thank everyone for tuning in and all of your comments. There were loads of them and we couldn't keep up, but you know, Matthew and I have this experience. We get carried away on these subjects because they are very deep subjects, and they are subjects that need to be explored. And we're happy. I'm sure we're both happy to have played our part in doing that today. There'll be more stuff, hopefully, with Off the Record and Unique Talent as well in the future. But
Yeah.
listen, Matthew, thank you to you again, and thank you to all our viewers. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you guys very much. And everyone, please do take care. Hit us up if you need to on talkofftherecord.org.
Great. All right, bye, guys.
See ya.